Thank you so much for being here for tonight's event with Sound Opinions, the 10 most important artists in Chicago music history. My name is Jennifer Chaika, and I am the Programs and Exhibits Manager at the Arlington Heights Memorial Library. With me tonight are my colleagues Neil Parker from Arlington Heights and Michael White from the Glenview Public Library. And please say hello to Megan Young behind the scenes. Tonight's event is brought to you by a group of libraries who love to connect people around music. So please thank your library: Addison Public Library, Arlington Heights, Aurora, Des Plaines, Forest Park, Glencoe, Glenview, Highland Park, Lincolnwood, Niles-Maine Library District, Oak Park, Schaumburg Township District Library, Skokie, Westchester, and Wheaton. Thank you also to Michael Naiman for making this event possible. A few housekeeping items before we begin. We are in webinar mode, so your cameras and mics are off, and we will be recording tonight's event. The closed captioning is enabled. If you do require that on the right, you can open or hide the subtitles. Shortly after we begin the event, we'll be launching a quick poll that's just to learn how many people are watching in your household and get us better attendance numbers. You'll also find a survey that greets you as you leave the event, and we'd love to have your responses to that. Please chat us throughout the night if you need anything. Questions are welcome, but we received a wonderful volume of questions in advance, so we'll be working from those first. And now for the main event. We are so honored to spend this time with Jim DeRogatis and Greg Kot, the hosts of Sound Opinions. Tonight, they will be sharing the 10 artists they feel contribute the most enduring and influential sounds over the past half century. We know this is no easy task in a city as rich in musical history as Chicago. A little bit about our guests. Born in Jersey City, New Jersey, Jim DeRogatis is a full-time lecturer in the professional writing program at Columbia College Chicago, and he continues to write about popular music for WBEZ Chicago. He spent 15 years as the rock critic at the Chicago Sun-Times, and he continues to cover news and culture as a freelance writer. He is also the author of Soulless: The Case Against R. Kelly. He has played in punk rock bands since age 13, but jokes that he is a drummer and not a musician. Greg Kot is the head of editorial at Koko Collection, and if you haven't checked out Koko Collection, you should. Previously the music critic at the Chicago Tribune for 30 years, Greg comprehensively covered popular music and reported on music-related issues. His books include acclaimed biographies of Mavis Staples and Wilco. He lives on Chicago's Northwest Side with his wife and Far Too Many Records. Together, Jim and Greg issued The Beatles versus the Rolling Stones. And they are also the hosts of Sound Opinions, your source for smart and engaging music criticism and conversation. Sound Opinions can be heard on WBEZ and 150 other public radio stations across the country. You can always learn more about them at soundopinions.org. And we are so pleased to welcome you. Welcome, Jim and Greg.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you. I think I got to update my bio. I write now for the New Yorker, actually, at times, and am an associate professor now. But thank you so much for having us. You there, Greg?
I'm here.
Ah, there you are. My lighting is better, as I pointed out before. So we better explain right away how we winnowed this list down to 10, because we could talk until like 3 a.m. and do 100 here, tonight. That would leave no time for questions. Or we could come back and do this 9 more times at least.
Yeah, no doubt. 10 artists. It's kind of ridiculous to think that you can do that, right? So why not? Let's go for it. It's fun. It's a fun exercise to think about. I think if nothing else, thinking about Chicago artists, most influential, most important, reminds us all about how incredible the city's music scene has been for a century plus, really. In my mind, Jim, I don't think we ever really talked about this, but the parameters of the show we do together, Sound Opinions, we're really talking about the rock and roll era, the rock and roll soul era into hip hop and contemporary music. So we're sort of defining this as, influential artists, musicians in the rock, soul, and on into the hip hop and house eras realm. It's not, we really haven't really considered jazz artists or pre rock and roll gospel artists, classical musicians. You know, we tried to narrow the focus a little bit, and it still leaves us with hundreds of possible choices.
It's true. It's true. Popular music would be another way to say. When I say rock and roll to my students, it means something antiquated and old.
Right.
Although we have always defined it. I mean, hell, I think the Reverend Thomas Dorsey had a lot of rock and roll in him, and he was Georgia Red before he became the father of gospel in Chicago. So I mean, it's an argument starter in some ways, but it's fun nonetheless, and it gives us a place to talk really about what we value in this musical legacy. So 10 artists and then questions, and we'd like to dig a little deeper than how could you have missed X, right? We, like I said, we could lead us off, right? I mean, really, all modern music starts with the electric blues, which start in Chicago.
Yeah, father of Chicago blues. He's been called that more than once. Muddy Waters, McKinley Morganfeld. He was, a Mississippi kid. Came to Chicago when he was well into his 20s. He was recorded down in Mississippi, solo acoustic, but came to Chicago and immediately electrified. In 1943, he came here, started playing with Big Bill Broonzy in the clubs. By 1944, he had an electric guitar and an electric band. So he was ahead of the curve. You know, you talk to a lot of the rock and rollers, and for them, growing up in the 50s and 60s, they heard the electric blues as the most mature form of electric music out there. Rock and roll couldn't compare to it. And that's why they emulated these artists. Muddy Waters was a huge influence on the rock and roll era, in addition to being the supreme blues master from which a lot of electric blues guitarists and musicians watched and learned from. He mentored so many of these artists. There's so many periods in his career. As I mentioned, the acoustic period before he came to Chicago, the electric period in the 50s, hugely influential. If you're talking about the great Chicago electric band, the first great Chicago electric band, you got to go to that Muddy Waters group of 1953. Little Walter Jacobs on harmonica, Jimmy Rogers on guitar, Elgin Evans on drums, Otis Spann on piano, and of course Muddy on guitar and vocals up top. They made 6 classic albums in the 50s. This was the music that Keith Richards was sticking his ear to, against on the little speaker and on his phonograph, trying to learn how they did it, how that meld of 2 guitars sounded, and how these white kids from England could adapt that for their own sound. Hoochie Coochie Man, I Just Want to Make Love to You, I'm Ready. Their big collaborator, one of their key collaborators, songwriters, was Willie Dixon, a man who certainly belongs in any top 10 list. And we want to mention him here because in a lot of ways I see him as the yin to Muddy's yang. They were brothers in arms. Willie played bass on tons of sessions at the Chess Studios, produced a lot of records, wrote songs for Muddy. What he loved about Muddy, he said they were singing sad blues in Chicago until Muddy got here. He put some pep in it, the energy, the bravado, that really transformed the sound. I mentioned the second period was the electric period in the 50s. In the 60s, he transformed himself, and a lot of people said, "Oh, he's old hat now." But those psychedelic records, and they
Electric
were psychedelic.
Mud, yes.
And in the late 60s were awesome. And we should mention another great Chicago band was a number of the musicians in that band, Rotary Connection, the band where Minnie Riperton, started recording. They were his backing band on these recordings in the late 60s. And then in the 70s had yet again another incarnation when Johnny Winter produced a bunch of albums for him and had really 4 really incredible periods. So the cut we're going to play is Blues and Trouble from one of those late 60s records, After the Rain, that he made with some of these Rotary Connection musicians on them.
We can't play all of these videos and we'd be here 5 hours, Greg. Um, yeah, Muddy Waters. We could have easily chosen Howlin' Wolf, as you said, Willie Dixon. Um, when I teach, I have this giant 150 student lecture class every fall at Columbia. I have two sections, so 300 first-year students. And it's part of a program called Big Chicago, designed to introduce incoming students, and like 70% of Columbia's attendees these days are from all around the country and around the world, literally, designed to introduce them to Chicago through the prisms of architecture or civil rights and politics, or in my case, music and media. And they always groan when I remind them that next Monday is Blues Day, right? Because in their heads, they have this tourist trap idea of the blues as a dead music, or maybe at the very best they have the Blues Brothers in their head, right? And the Blues Brothers is great, of course, in certain ways, but it's a narrow slice of the blues. And then I play them some of the artists that we're going to highlight tonight, including Muddy, and they realize, wait a minute, this is very, very relevant, and it's not just what you see on the main stages, not the little stages at Blues Fest, kind of just self-indulgent, often white music these days. And they realize the connections. I think blues has been stolen from younger listeners in a lot of ways. Don't you agree? By us having one version of it.
Well, yeah, again, you're right about the tourist attraction aspect of it. These tourists come from overseas and they're expecting to see a certain kind of thing, an old blues guy sitting on a stool in a corner, playing really sad songs. And it's kind of like a hackneyed version of what the blues is, but there's still a lot of innovation going on in the genre. And it's more a case of where do you look for it? Sometimes it's not in the most obvious spots, but it's in these little smaller labels right now that are operating. And Alligator, actually, out of Chicago, is still operating and actually producing some really, really interesting music in recent years.
Shamika Copeland's album, Uncivil War, was my favorite of 2020.
Yeah, she's an incredible artist. And they've got some up and coming guitar players, too, that are, extending and expanding the sound that people like Muddy Waters invented. So, again, the influence of Muddy Waters can't be overstated. That's the fact that he has basically towered over electric blues for 50 plus years and influenced so many artists who have subsequently picked up an electric guitar and how to play it. It's a legacy that's unquestionably one of the biggest in Chicago music history.
Well, I'm going to stay with the blues for my first choice. I think along with the kind of tourist trappings that younger listeners these days associate with the blues, and which turns them off initially, is the thought that it's also very male music, right? And, my baby done me wrong, I shot her down by the river kind of thing, guys complaining about women who did them wrong. And then I lay some Cora Walton on them. Cora came from Shelby County, Tennessee. Daughter of a sharecropper, left Memphis for Chicago 1952 with her truck driver husband. I also always introduce the concept of the Great Migration, Greg, because a lot of the musics we're talking about were, all of the music we're going to talk about today was formed in Chicago and represents, I think, a certain Chicago ethos and sound. The blues that was the acoustic blues Muddy Waters was playing early in his career, right? The music that Cora Walton, later Koko Taylor, grew up listening to was acoustic. It was country blues, right? It was back porch acoustic blues. You come to Chicago, you're playing on Maxwell Street, or you're playing in the clubs like the Checkerboard Lounge. You got to be heard. You got to be heard over the crowds of drunks. You got to be heard over the street noise and the L. So you plug in, you amplify, you up the intensity and the energy and the volume, right? And I think you can hear the city of Chicago in all of these artists. That was an element I forgot to mention earlier, and also a certain Chicago ethos, right? That Muddy Waters, you can knock him down, but he's not going to stay down. And Koko Taylor, which is just celebratory. So it always kind of blows my 17-year-old first-year students' minds when I play them this track. I just love that. And I love to see 150 young faces always, Greg. Like, wow, this stuff didn't, singing about sex in a self-insured, female-empowered way did not start with Megan Thee Stallion, and Cardi B. WAP. I mean, theoretically, pitching a wang dang doodle all night long is I'm going to throw a hell of a party, right? But, we know what Koko's singing about. What does she want? She wants a wang dang doodle. And how long does she wants it all night long, right?
Yeah, she's amazing. She had a hard life. I mean, as you mentioned, from the South, sharecropper's farm, was on her hands and knees cleaning people's floors, before she became a blues singer. And the blues, we talk about this cliche, rock and roll saved my life. The blues saved her life. It brought her to a new level of understanding of the world and brought her a stature that she could never have imagined on that sharecropper's farm. And with good reason. That voice was a powerhouse. Again, Willie Dixon, he wrote that song, obviously first hit for Howlin' Wolf. I love the way how she took it back.
But she owns it after
it's
that.
Mine now.
Yeah.
And there's a great, and I would point out to all our attendees here to seek out another song by Koko called Insane Asylum that she recorded a few years later with Willie. It's basically a duet where they're going back and forth. It is one of the most intense blues songs ever. Insane Asylum by Koko and Willie Dixon. So definitely check it out. She's an incredible, groundbreaking artist from that era. And I think, Jim, I think this choice speaks to the fact that her, as a woman in a field crowded with testosterone, can't be overstated about how important and groundbreaking that was, how pioneering that was in the Chicago blues scene.
Absolutely. I mean, she set a mold and was a huge influence because of that. Notice that some people are bemoaning the fact, Greg, that there aren't captions on some of these videos. And unfortunately, a lot of this older footage in particular, it's exceedingly difficult, if not impossible, to find captions. And I know because I've had some hearing impaired students. But we're doing our best. So a thing or 15,000 about the Staples, don't you?
Yeah, I wanted to write a book about the Staples for a long time before I finally got the opportunity to do it. It was Mavis Staples was gracious enough to open up her life to me, and it was an incredible experience getting to know her very well. The Staples singers, again, another product of the migration. Pop Staples, Roebuck Pop Staples, came to Chicago in the mid-30s from a sharecropper's farm. There was a dead end. It was a dead end down south. He came up north with a wealth of musical knowledge. He sang in gospel quartets on Sunday morning in church, but on Saturday nights he was out there playing the blues on his guitar. He learned how to play blues guitar by watching Charlie Patton on his plantation. Can you imagine that, being a kid watching Charlie Patton play? Charlie Patton, in many ways, the guy who invented the modern blues. Preceding Muddy, who was electric blues godfather, I'd say Patton can rightfully called the father of the modern blues. In back in the 1910s and 20s, with Pop's learning how to play guitar. Pop's innovation was to blend that blues guitar with the gospel harmonies. I think a real innovator in the way gospel was voiced in the 50s and 60s, and basically taught his kids how to sing. He had them sit around him in the living room in their home on the South Side, and taught them those 4-part harmonies that he learned down south, Purvis, his son, and Cleotha, Yvonne, and Mavis, the youngest, his daughters. And they were the group. It was, imagine the sight on these South and West Side churches. This older gentleman with the graying hair walking in with a guitar, which really wasn't a common instrument in church music at the time, followed by these 4 kids, one of whom, the youngest, had the biggest voice, and they had to sit her, they actually had to stand her on a chair so she could reach the microphone. That was Mavis. And Mavis is still pretty, she's still pretty tiny, really. She's about 4'11", 5 feet tall on a good day. But what a voice. And there she is in that picture right there. They had a huge hit when Mavis was still a teenager in the mid-50s called Uncloudy Day, which made them gospel giants. And they were able to tour outside Chicago, starting with that song. And they became very good friends with Martin Luther King Jr. when he was just starting to become a national figure. Pops and Martin Luther King became very good friends. And in a lot of ways, the Staple Singers became King's opening act. And when he would tour, King would go on speaking tours, and the Staples would, in many times would sing before MLK came on the stage to deliver a sermon. So they were hand in glove throughout the 60s, the civil rights movement. Pop started writing songs based on King's speeches. If he can preach it, we can sing it, he said. So this whole idea of the civil rights movement being driven by soul and gospel music, the Staples were right at the center of that. They got signed to Stax Records, the biggest soul label in the South, in the late 60s, and then had a string of hits in the 70s. And a lot of the purists in the church said, "Pops, you're backsliding. Why are you turning your back on the church?" He said, "I haven't turned my back on the church. Any one of these songs could be played in church on Sunday. But this is music about right now. All our music doesn't have to be about the ever after. It's about what we can do right now to have a little heaven here on earth." And one of those songs we're going to hear next, "I'll Take You There," their #1 hit from 1972.
I don't know what that was, Greg. Harsh ending to that video clip. Yeah, we could have talked about Mahalia Jackson, who literally stood behind Dr. King. He was stuck that day on the National Mall with the biggest crowd he'd ever spoken to. And he was reading off the script because he was so nervous. And then he made an aside about this dream he had. And Mahalia, who had opened and sung for him and ushered him on, began shouting at him, "Wait a minute, tell us about your dream, Martin." We could have talked about Albertina Walker. We could have talked about the Reverend Thomas Dorsey, who came forsake blues after his wife and child died, and came to Chicago and literally became the godfather of modern gospel music. But the Staples are our gospel choice, I think. And you know what? I think if you are not a person of faith, that song is still incredibly inspiring, as are most of their songs. I'll take you there. What's going to take you there? This inner force, this inner power, this spirit, however you define it. And let's face it, there's a lot of sex in that song too, Mr. Cobb. I'll take you where? Where are you going to take me, Mavis? And Dad, who is an incredible guitarist who never gets enough credit for being such an innovative guitarist, is playing those lines, and she's scatting, "Tell me, Daddy, tell me,"
Well, it's interesting because they actually recorded that song in Muscle Shoals with the Muscle Shoals rhythm section, right? So they essentially replaced the band feel that the Staples had established with the Muscle Shoals rhythm section. But Mavis took over the studio. If you think about that song, it's only 5 lines. Al Bell, the president of the label, wrote it. It's 5 lines. Yeah. It's 4.5, 5 minutes long. there's a 30-minute version of that song that I heard.
Yeah.
That's from those stacks of vaults. And basically it's Mavis improvising with the band in the studio. Next time you hear the song, listen to how Mavis basically carries that song. She wrote it on the fly, essentially creating the single out of it. They wouldn't have had a hit with 5 lines of verse. It was more about the voice and the way she was able to use it interacting with the band. But Pops was truly an innovator as a guitar player. He didn't play on the recording of that track, but his guitar playing influenced the guy who played on it. So it's a long line. And Elvis Presley had a great line about Pops's guitar. First time he met Mavis, he said, "Man, I love your daddy's guitar playing. He plays that nervous guitar," because he loved all that treble on it. You know, love that treble.
Yep. Well, I'm going to give the drummer some, Greg. Bo Diddley was not a drummer, but of course that rhythm became famous. Again, the Great Migration. He's born Ellis Otha Bates in Macomb, Mississippi, right? Comes to the south side of Chicago. Chicago, makes its imprint on him. Of course, he records for Chess Records, Chicago-based label. And, Chess has pluses and minuses to its long legacy. But the music it brought us is immortal and enduring. I think we forget the influence of Bo Diddley, just how wide-ranging it is in taking the polyrhythmic, rhythm that he gave his name to, and putting the primacy on that over and above everything else in the mix, over the vocals, over the guitar. And he is essentially just a rhythm guitarist who is backing up, the rhythms of the drums, having a full-time percussionist and right-hand man to lob insults at, Jerome Green. Jerome did nothing but dance, shake the maracas, and be there as Bo's foil. If this sounds familiar, this is all modern hip hop, right? The idea that it's only with hip hop in the 80s that the idea of the beat being everything and everything else in a mix coming second to it. Bo had gotten there 3 decades earlier. I also think, look at the guy. Just look at those glasses, look at that jacket, look at that bow tie, look at the guitar that he homemade originally out of a cigar box. This guy is king of the nerds. And I think one of the great things in rock and roll in the 50s is that you don't have to be a god. Obviously Elvis Presley was, right? Sex personified. So was Little Richard. So was Chuck Berry, right? But then we have like Buddy Holly and Bo Diddley. It's like these guys are not turning anybody's head. They're just average guys who are able to turn themselves into something so much bigger through the power of the music that they record and perform. And I think that's part of the story of rock and roll. You're nobody, but you pick up a guitar and you have 3 chords, and Joey Ramone changes the world, or Bo Diddley changes the world. So Bo Diddley, right? It is still very controversial, debated. What does that mean? There was African-American slang in the early 20th century. Bo Diddley meant, what are you doing, Greg? What are you doing? And you'd say, Bo Diddley, I ain't doing nothing. Doing diddly squat, right? But there also was an instrument in West Africa called the diddley bow that was a homemade stringed instrument. Again, he made his guitar out of a cigar box. And so a lot of people wonder where Bo Diddley came from, but it just seems now at this point, 60, 70 years later, it's just like it's always here and it always should be. And it just watch the coolness. And also note that he's got a trio of beautiful backing singers here who are actually playing instruments and doing it quite well. Again, though, everything in service to the rhythm, great second rhythm guitarist. Seems like there were sound troubles. I don't know why. Playing loud and clear for me, Greg. Was it loud for you?
No, I had It was kind of dull. It was almost like you were listening in another room to it. It was a weird mix.
Oh, well, let's the Zoom thing. Let's go down to the bar. There's like 300-400 people. No, I guess we can't meet that many in person yet. Damn, I'm sorry about that.
Well,
love Bo.
You can still, I still think that the image of him coming out there playing that guitar, that distinctive looking guitar, is pretty powerful. And he was a true innovator in the way he approached that instrument. I mean, the idea of feedback and distortion, those were new concepts, and Bo was definitely playing with that and using the guitar, as you said, like a drum in a lot of ways. It was it was more of a percussion instrument in his hands than it was a solo instrument, and created those indelible. He invented a beat for a rhythm. The Bo Diddley is essential to rock and roll.
As with Muddy Waters doing Electric Mud, and Howlin' Wolf plugging in and following Hendrix later in his career. Bo Diddley, I just highlighted this as a Desert Island Jukebox extra on the show a while back. I had never heard of this album. Somebody turned me on to it only a couple of months ago. Black Gladiator. So early 70s, Bo's like, I'm not done yet. And he's seeing George Clinton, and he's seeing, obviously Hendrix had come and gone, and he makes this Black Power album, which is ferocious. And he's posing on the cover. Look it up. Google it, people. Bo Diddley, Black Gladiator. He's in like black bondage wear, dressed up as like a gladiator. And wow, is that a bizarre record and a wonderful record. It's he had nothing Parliament Funkadelic didn't have. Good stuff.
Yeah, that's great stuff. And God bless Bo. He was an unconventional star, but a star without a doubt. I mean, he had presence, and when I once got to meet him, and man, the hands, the size of the hands alone, I mean, no wonder he played that instrument like a drum. He was punishing those strings. All right,
you're going to be a little celebratory now, are you not?
Well, we're going to move it up to there's sort of a line here that's a kind of a direct one in terms of the tradition of blues and gospel and soul music in Chicago. Maurice White, the master musician composer who founded Earth, Wind and Fire in the late 60s, cut his teeth at Chess Studios in the 50s and 60s. He was studying at what was then known as the Chicago Musical College. It was a conservatory, right? And at the same time, working sessions for people like Etta James, Howlin' Wolf, Little Milton, Willie Dixon. So he was getting great work at the studio, multi-instrumentalist. Ramsey Lewis, said, look at this kid. I need to bring him on the road with me. I need this musician with me on the road. Ramsey Lewis was the hottest thing in Chicago music at that time, playing a hybrid of like jazz and pop. And, at first, Maurice didn't want to do it. He was making too good of money recording sessions in Chess. But he said that going out with Ramsey Lewis's trio, where he was straddling jazz and R&B and pop, really opened his eyes to what he could do once he started off on his own. So instead of just working sessions, working with Ramsey Lewis really opened his eyes to the possibilities of what he could do musically. That spirit of sort of this cross-cultural musicality informed his composing. I always thought of Maurice as kind of R&B's answer to Duke Ellington in the 70s. He was big screen orchestral compositions designed to be inspiring. At a time of great difficulty in the African-American community, his songs were inspirational. They were spiritual. They were about aspiration and about getting to a better place in this world. Some people thought, oh, it's kind of cosmic hippie jive stuff, but those songs inspired people. And I talk to people now who are grew up with those records, and they say what a role they played in their lives. Because first of all, they were all over the radio. He had 16 top 40 hits, his band, in the 70s primarily. But also those records, you could sink into those records because they were concept records. They were designed to be listened to from beginning to end. And he was bringing all sorts of musical exotica into play. Maurice White's signature instrument was the kalimba, that African thumb piano, and you could hear it on a ton of their records. And then he got the greatest singers and musicians available to work with him, because everybody wanted to work with Maurice. He was kind of like a Stevie Wonder type figure, where who wouldn't want to play with this guy? He was writing these great songs with these incredibly ambitious arrangements that brought out the best in the people that worked with him. So here's one of those amazing songs, September.
Spoiler alert, we are not going to do Chicago, the band. I don't know why you would ever talk about horns by anybody else when those horns were so good. What do you think? You said Duke Ellington. How much do you think that we're not going to talk about any jazz artists? It's a bit further afield. But obviously we both are well aware of the jazz legacy of this city, whether you're talking Benny Goodman or Louis Armstrong's formative years here, right out of New Orleans, right? What do you think about Sun Ra Orchestra? I mean, because the costumes are just a little slicker, and the kind of psychedelic ethos and cosmic imagery, it's just like the pop version of what that crazy Sun Ra communal living bizarro, lifestyle was.
There's definitely some of that. And then you could hear stuff like this rubbing off on people like the Art Ensemble of Chicago. They were kind of doing their own riffing. They were, to my mind, that if I had to name like a all-time favorite Chicago group, they'd be right up there. We're not really dealing with jazz specifically. We'll do a whole other presentation just on that if I had my brothers. But their influence, they were influenced by the predecessors in the jazz world, because he loved jazz. I mean, like I said, he was on tour with Ramsey Lewis.
Yeah,
and Ramsey Lewis knew a few things about jazz. So the one thing about Maurice was that he was a musical polyglot. He was drawing from all sorts of influences, including classical music. And he incorporated that in their music. I mean, those records hold up really, really well. And I can tell you right now, I was on a college campus. One of my daughters went to a college that every September, the first day on campus, that's the song they play. All the kids get in the mall, and they pump that song through the speakers. Here it is, like 50 years later, that song is still making people dance. You can't deny it.
Oh, it will not be stopped, nor will Curtis Mayfield. I think his legacy, to think that another artist in the R&B soul realm who followed outsold Curtis 3-1 or something. He currently sits in the Federal Correction Institution awaiting for his moment before justice. Whereas Curtis Mayfield and the influence he had goes on and on and on. Our friend Aaron Cohen did a great book on Chicago soul sound, and it was considered soft soul, right? In part because it was less aggressive than some other sounds, in part because of the rather high falsetto kind of feminine voice of Curtis, or even of Donny Hathaway, right? It was smoother, it was more gentle, there were less rough edges than, say, something like the Stax Volt sound from down south. But it was also, like the Staple Singers, a music of protest, of empowerment, of community, drawing from the Black church gospel, giving it the grit of the blues, and trying to motivate people. And I think, one of the things that's fascinating to me about Mayfield is, of course, huge hit with the Superfly soundtrack, right? And here is a fairly derivative, nihilistic, if you want, portrait of the drug dealing, pimping lifestyle on the streets, whereas the music that Curtis wrote is a dialogue about how that is a dead end, right? And how we have the power to aspire to better. It is not that we only have this one choice. And I think a lot of his music was nuanced in that way. And of course, he was great even before he set out as a solo artist. Started, was also a businessman, like the Reverend Thomas Dorsey in the world of gospel. Curtis Mayfield starts the Kurt Tom label, an independent black-run label long before. But, when he's living as a kid in Cabrini Green, singing with Jerry Butler in the Impressions, coming from doo-wop. I mean, just great at every stage of his career. Just fascinating musician. Remember, your dream is your only scheme, so keep on pushing. Yeah, I forgot to mention the German captions on that. It is really hard to find good performance video of some of these artists, and I do love the quality of that video, especially showing the layers of percussion in Curtis Mayfield's music. Again, like Bo, so much happening with the rhythm, except obviously, he is a great singer, and the melodies are great, and the horns punctuating. There's also that shock of recognition, Greg, that no, Kanye West did not write that hook. But he made really, really good use of it.
Yeah. He wrote a lot of hooks. Again, we talked about the civil rights movement earlier, the Impressions, which was Curtis's group before he went solo. They were another key architect of that soundtrack. And Curtis right at the center of it as a songwriter and also as a guitar player. His guitar playing is incredibly influenced. So we had two artists in that gospel soul field out of Chicago, Pop Staples and Curtis Mayfield, whose guitar style was completely self-taught, totally idiosyncratic, and very influential, among musicians across genres subsequently. Mayfield died very young. He had a terrible accident in the 90s on stage and was paralyzed and died after that. But he, as he said, a businessman, an entrepreneur, a producer, a songwriter, a singer, with heavy duty lyrics on top of that. What a legacy he left behind.
He had been performing outdoors in Brooklyn when a sudden thunderstorm came up, and lightning, I believe, hit the lighting rig and it fell on him and he was paralyzed. There's some great documentary footage out there, though, of Curtis in the last years of his life, confined to the wheelchair, obviously in discomfort, but still that spirit was indomitable. I mean, he move on up. He was always moving on up.
Yeah, it was that aspirational thing, and I need to mention too Jerry Butler, the Cook County board member, Cook County board commissioner, who was Curtis's childhood friend. Yeah, and in the Impressions, and had an equally incredible career side by side, as a solo artist alongside Curtis's. So we got to mention Jerry as well as one of the key guys in that era as well. Moving up into the 80s, Naked Raygun. Chicago didn't have much of a punk scene in the 70s, but it really took off in the 80s, and this band was right at the center of it. Bands like Big Black, Effigies, Articles of Faith, they were all very prominent in the city. We could have named any one of those bands as part of this list, but the Chicago underground really developed during that era, and this band was probably, not probably, I think it was the most important band because they were one of the earliest. Also, they were the first Chicago underground band, punk band from that era to tour nationally. They really got out on the road and played a lot of shows. And I know people in New York who saw them then and were inspired by them. Dave Grohl told me a great story. The Foo Fighters drummer, the Nirvana drummer, the Foo Fighters songwriter. His punk awakening was seeing Naked Raygun when he was age 13. He said, that's the music I want to play the rest of my life. He was taken there by a cousin of his who lived in Chicago, and to see them at the Cubby Bear when he was visiting from out of town. So you hear stories about this band like that from numerous musicians over the years. A band like Nirvana became Nirvana because of bands like this touring the country in the 80s for very little money, not a lot of record sales, but they made great album after great album. Jeff Pizzotti, the singer, was the master of the wordless sing-along chorus. If you didn't know any of the words, you could still sing along with Naked Raygun songs. They were just so catchy and so powerful. What a rhythm section. Great guitar player, and John Haggerty writing a lot of those riffs in that band. I mean, they were an absolute powerhouse live. And occasionally you can still see them perform live. I think they're working on yet another album that we hope to see sometime in the next year or two. Here's one of their great tracks from their 1985 album, Throb Throb. It's called Rat Patrol.
There's a great fake ending there, and then they come back. Naked Raygun, it was the era of Ronald Reagan. And I think one of the things that Naked Raygun doesn't get enough credit for, Greg, is how overtly political, just front and center they were. The indie rock and the post-punk of the era, this is where you and I began as critics. And, there were underpinnings to a lot of the bands of politics, but it could be subtle and you could miss it. Not with Naked Raygun. I mean, so, this is pre the first two Gulf Wars, right? And they are presciently singing an homage in that song to Rat Patrol, a bad 70s TV show about, chasing Rommel in the Jeeps through the desert, right? But think of how prescient those lyrics were. Machine guns blaring, Arabs staring, wondering why the Westerners are back. Right. I saw them as a snot-nosed kid sneaking in underage to Maxwell's in Hoboken. And I never thought about Chicago. I grew up Jersey City in Hoboken, right across the river from Manhattan, center of the universe, that New York attitude. There's no other city in America, is there, right? And here are these four guys from Chicago, and Lord knows where they had driven from. No doubt it was a 12-hour drive in the van. They load up on stage, giant Marshall stacks, and they all plugged electric razors into the heads of their amps and shaved on stage so it'd be really fresh before they played. And they were all 7 feet tall, especially Pizzotti, and I had heard the cliches about Chicago, right? City of broad shoulders, but he was 7 feet tall and his shoulder span must have been 8 feet. You know what I mean? Yeah. And he would do that thing where he'd hover off the lip of the stage into the crowd, and he's like halfway in the middle of the room. They all had those buzz cuts, and it wasn't only, the politics were ubiquitous, Managua is a song that has 2 lines of lyric. Hey, you pretty boy, onward to Managua. I'm in college. I had a poster on the wall, that Raygun nuclear clock. In 5 minutes, we begin bombing Russia, and if it wasn't Russia and nuclear annihilation, we were maybe going to wind up getting sent to Nicaragua. And Naked Raygun spoke for us.
It was a Cold War, and we thought we were all going to die in a nuclear holocaust, and, Home of the Brave, another one of one of the greatest songs of the 80s. My experience with them, I saw them probably a dozen times during that era, and they were always playing on these tiny stages that were about 6 inches high, and every time they would get on stage and plug in and the song would start, you'd surge forward. And then the only band I know that had this impact, like when the sound came out of those speakers, people like, you flinched almost, because it was like this physical wall of sound hitting you. It was amazing. And I'd never heard a band sound that powerful and that ready. And it went with the look. Look at these guys. They don't look like they look like they could be a street gang. I mean, they look tougher than the Ramones did on their first album cover. You know, it's kind of like you want to mess with these guys, and the sound had that impact as well. They were not there to mess around.
No, and it was an industrial sound. It was a Midwestern sound. I'm sure we started to lose some people with Raygun, and now they are looking at Liz Phair and said, "Yeah, okay, fine. What the hell are you guys talking about, though? You know, you didn't mention 1,700 others." You know, again, one of the influences right now today, bands are taking to the basement in Pilsen, or you know, the garage in Schaumburg, and forming, dreaming of putting together something that will someday play live and record because of Naked Raygun. And in Liz Phair's case, now 2 generations of young women. We reviewed a record today for the radio show that'll air this week, right? Girl in Red, right? Who has become a YouTube social media sensation for singing so candidly about her sexuality, coming out as gay and struggling with all the challenges that represents. You know, I think a lot of there are 2 generations of young women who are speaking frankly about their sexuality because of this woman from Winnetka, who really, during the height of the alternative era, you know, gave a middle finger to the boys. You know, with a debut album called Exile in Guyville. Guyville was the nickname for Wicker Park, you know, before Banana Republic and the Gap and stuff, when it was still relatively seedy and a rock and roll haven. You know, talking about the sexist attitudes of many, even in the hip alternative rock scene, forget about in society in general. And I think she was a great media manipulator. You know, it's the height of postmodernism and irony in the 90s alt era to say that my debut album, Exile in Guyville, is a song-by-song answer to that album all you boys, especially you rock critics, love, Exile on Main Street by the Rolling Stones. Look, I never bought that. You know, there are people who have done, fellow critics of ours, friends of ours, who have done the side-by-side comparison and swear to it. I look, Liz just had this idea. I have a lot of songs. I'm going to put them out. It's going to be a debut double album, and I'm going to say there's a connection to the Stones. But talking frankly about sex, talking frankly about sexism, talking about being a young woman, I actually think I prefer, and this is sort of sacrilege to the cult of Phair, I prefer Whip Smart and White Chocolate Space Egg, albums number 2 and 3, because they were just about the songs and not this grand concept of hers. But really 3 fantastic albums, and then hit and miss ever since. But this song, the one I'm going to highlight here, is, I think, a classic feminist anthem. Do you want to be a polyester bride, or do you want to spread your wings and fly? I also love the that little bit of a Nelson Algren conceit there. I was talking to Henry, my bartending friend. I mean, how freaking Chicago is that, right?
Well, you know, Chicago, I mean, that's the title of Guyville, basically, that first album that you mentioned. You know, I don't think enough is appreciated about how Liz had to come up, talk about Koko Taylor being a lone female voice, or one of the lone female voices in a testosterone filled field. This is the same with Liz, coming up at a time when, you know, you had to pay your dues, and you had to jump in the van like Naked Raygun did and play 200 shows a year. She didn't do any of that. She just wrote great songs in her bedroom, and, you know, had the audacity to put out a record based on that. And it was a great record, and it spoke exactly to what it felt like to be a young woman living in Chicago at that time. There's a lot of records that came out during that era. That is one of those records that to this day holds up incredibly well, in not only encapsulating a specific period of time in her life, but also talking about what it's like to be a young woman, and trying to assert yourself in a patriarchal society. And it's amazing how many young women today know this record.
Oh,
You know,
yeah.
it's kind of like a
sacred text.
yeah. It's very similar in some ways to something like Joni Mitchell's Blue for that era. You know, it was the same kind of impact. Like, here's the woman who's really talking about stuff that we can relate to. You know?
Minus the admitted facts that Liz really couldn't sing, and she was a horrible performer on stage.
Well,
But she had something to say. That was what was
she
important.
She got better. And when you got songs, it's almost like, you know, a lot of other things take care of themselves. You know, to me, that was the least of my concern. People would say Bob Dylan couldn't sing either.
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree.
I think she did a pretty good job with what she had.
I agree.
So,
there are some also troubling post-feminist questions there, but that's a whole other symposia, I'll tell you. And we have Frankie Knuckles to talk about.
Yes, we do. You know, I really think there's no way we could cover all the ground, but you know, Frankie was the godfather of house music. You know, we're doing a lot of godfathers and fathers in this segment with Muddy Waters, people like that, and now Frankie Knuckles. You know, Frankie didn't discover house music or you know, build it, but he certainly was one of the primary purveyors of it. Coming from New York in the late 70s, and then basically, you know, DJing at clubs like the Warehouse, where house music emerged, was allowed to flourish. You know, an amazing DJ, also a producer and a mixer, great taste. You know, house music was sort of the orphan. You know, disco, they burned disco records, you know, at the White Sox ballpark one night. And, you know, funnily enough, how most of those artists happen to have black faces, you know, or brown faces. And those records were being burned. Don't think that a community didn't see that, what was happening. I think Chicago House, as Frankie once told me, you know, they burned those records, but we built something out of the ashes, and that was house, and that took over the world. It became even bigger than disco ever imagined. To this day, the dance culture that we see around the world has been built on the back of Chicago House and Detroit techno. And I want to add, you know, the industrial music of that same era to this. The side by side, those two movements kind of redefined what dance music could be. And I remember going to clubs like Exit, where you could hear a house record next to a disco, an industrial record, and realize that these were Chicago artists and producers making these records. You know, whether it was Al Jorgensen or Frankie Knuckles or Marshall Jefferson, you know, these were great artists from this era making underground dance music that ended up becoming hugely popular. And
you know, just as Liz Phair was giving voice to young women under the patriarchy, I think Frankie Knuckles and many of the Wax Trax artists, Greg, are giving LGBTQ people the spotlight. You know, and
Really?
Here we are, we're queer, get used to it. You know,
it was dance music for outsiders that became accepted by the mainstream. Before the mainstream got to it, it was music for the outsiders, the people who were kind of the misfits of society, so to speak. They found their own sound, and Frankie was at the center of it. An incredibly smart and generous man, and behind so many great recordings. Here's one of them that he produced, Tears.
You know, so much of the Chicago house sound, Greg, is characterized by fairly straight gospel vocals coming in.
Oh, no doubt.
I love that. And, you know, and hey, Frankie Knuckles has a street named after him now. Where is Steve Dahl today? In his basement. So are you and me, but that's okay. Everybody is right now in the pandemic. I think it's one of the saddest points in Chicago history, up there with the '68 riot and the assassination of Fred Hampton. You know, burning records. That's what Nazi Germany did with books. Yeah. All right, burning records by people of color and gay people because you didn't. I mean, you don't like disco. Listen to something else.
Yeah. Exactly.
And so the music goes underground, and Frankie and his cohort, steals it back from the Bee Gees. There's that cliche. If you're traveling, you and I have had this experience. You're in Italy or you're in France, and there's a cab driver, and in rudimentary English, where are you from? Chicago, Al Capone, Michael Jordan, right? But if you're in a music store and you say Chicago, they say Frankie Knuckles.
They know house all around the world for sure.
Absolutely. So I'm going to end on this, gentleman. And the groans are not audible to me because everybody's muted except you. And I know you won't groan. All right. Look, I'm going to make the case here. Chicago, for the third largest city in America, the best city in America, not to have put its imprint on hip hop until so late in the game. We were in the shadows of the right and left coasts, right? The New York sound and the LA Dr. Dre kind of gangster ethos, in Chicago, we obviously Common preceded Kanye, and then they become mutually supportive. And there was some hip hop, but not a hip hop that was uniquely Chicago. And what Kanye did on his first three albums, 2004, 5, and 7, College Dropout, Late Registration, Graduation, he is talking about not everyone in the African American community is dealing drugs or aspiring to deal drugs. Some of us scrape together the money to get on the bus to go to work at the Gap at the Evergreen Plaza shopping mall, right? And we barely make enough in an hour to cover our bus fare home. Some of us, church is a part of our lives. Our moms are educators. We have relatives who were Black Panthers who staff those soup kitchens and daycare centers. This is a rich community with a diverse set of experiences that isn't about gangbanging. And I'm going to talk about my life as part of that. And you know what? I was at my grandma's deathbed in Roses and I cried, right? I think a vulnerability, a genuineness, a refusal to play into the stereotypes that dominated so much of hip hop, and an incredible groundbreaking sonic approach. Dusty radio is a huge thing in Chicago. Those deep B-sides on the great soul cuts, right, and R&B cuts, and crate digging, and that culture of finding the coolest 3 or 4 second riff that will then power my sound. I mean, that all starts with Kanye. And I think the brilliant albums continue. So the first 3 are indelible and really bring hip hop sonically and lyrically to a whole new level for the new millennium. And then with 808s and Heartbreak and My Beautiful Twisted Fantasy, albums number 5 and
4 and 5.
4 and 5, thank you. He invents a whole genre that, for better or worse, Drake owes his entire career to 808s and Heartbreak. Kanye's mom dies, and his fiance, the one before he got involved with the Kardashian family, he's at a low point. It is what Tonight's the Night was for Neil Young, or Big Star Third was for Big Star, a Dark Night of the Soul album, unparalleled. And you have legion, starting with Drake, legions of these emo rappers today following in that mode. Okay. So then Kanye kind of loses the plot a bit. He's up to 3 rather disappointing albums since. He's found God, but it's a weird kind of gospel thing he's doing. The whole super celebrity. Look, I just want to remind you people that if we were to time travel back to Liverpool, circa the heyday of the Beatles, and we went into the pub, there'd be plenty of guys sitting at the bar saying, I don't know what's wrong with that John, all this crap shooting his mouth off, we're bigger than Jesus. I wish he'd shut up and just play his music. Yeah. Kanye has often been his own worst enemy when it comes to his public perception and his pandering to fame and bum rushing Taylor Swift and all this stuff. but the sonic and lyrical innovations are just absolutely undeniable. And we forget, he made like 4 versions of the video I'm going to show you a bit of, and had 6 or 7 mixes, and each of them was more brilliant than the next. The cocaine, the doves. I love the girls playing double dutch, you know, and it's got this martial rhythm that then you hear differently when you see the imagery of the playground. And, it's just insane. I saw him perform at the Grammys. I don't know how you missed this. The Trib would have flown you out. I mean, the Sun-Times never had enough money. I don't know. They thought he was a big deal. Send Jim to the Grammys in LA. Maybe he'll win. He didn't win. I think he was sore about that. But he performed that on live, in LA at the Staples Center with Mavis doing the female vocal part. And to see Mavis Staples, brings it whole circle. Mavis Staples with Kanye West, Jesus Walks.
Yeah, it's and actually co-write on that song by his pal Rhymefest, another great Chicago artist of that era. There was a renaissance of Chicago hip hop right around the period. Lupe Fiasco, Rhymefest. We've seen the emergence of Chance the Rapper since then. It's been an incredible period of music and innovation in hip hop in Chicago, and Kanye was kind of at the forefront of it, and taking a lot from Common. Common was a mentor. And No ID, Common's collaborator and producer, was also very key in Kanye's early days. He established himself as a producer in New York with people like Jay-Z, among others. And then you're right, that 5-album run, to my mind, those first 5 Kanye records stand up with any 5-album run by any artist in the 2000s. So don't sleep on this guy. Just because he's got this terrible public reputation, those records are truly innovative, and artists have been paying attention to Kanye for a long time because the guy knows what he's doing in the recording studio.
Well, and it's a classic story. It's not unlike Prince or Michael Jackson, right? You reach a level of superstardom and fame where all the people you came up with who were your sounding stones, your trusted anchors, are gone one by one. And couple that with mental problems that he has been very frank about talking about, all in the glare of the brightest possible spotlight. I really do feel sorry for Kanye. It's like, hey, Kanye, phone home. Come talk to me and Greg about music again for 3-4 hours.
Ever since Mom left us, Donda was a great woman. I got to know her when she was alive, and she was a real anchor in his life. And I think the fact that she passed, I don't think he's, I don't want to attribute too much to it, but I can't not think that Kanye changed after that happened, and kind of lost his anchor.
Yeah. On the other hand, it is almost impossible to forgive him for hugging Trump.
Like I said, he lost his way, man.
I'm never forgiving Jimmy Fallon for tussling Trump's hair either. Yeah. Screw Jimmy Fallon. All right, so we're done. Thank you. Good night. No. What do you have questions for us, Jennifer? Or who's throwing the questions at us?
Michael, I think, right?
Yeah. So thank you guys so much. We could easily sit here and listen to you guys for another hour and a half. It's just, it's amazing. The videos, some of the sound drops out, but it doesn't matter. We just want to hear you guys talk about it. So, Jennifer and Neil and I and our library partners were just as anxious to hear about this list as tonight's audience. I can assure you of that. And now the fun part starts, the arguments, right? If we're passionate music fans here. So before we have any sort of virtual fist fight in the chat, I wanted to kind of ask you guys if you could add one more personal favorite, kind of a runner up maybe, and a number 11. This one goes up to 11 that maybe you had to leave on the editing floor, the editing room floor, maybe just one more. Mm-hmm. See if we can appease some of these folks in the chat.
Who else?
I got a 4-way tie. You want to go first, Jim?
Well, like I said, I teach this class, music and media in Chicago, and we do an entire class, 3 hours on gospel, an entire class on house music, an entire class on that 90s alternative era. So obviously, there are dozens and dozens of artists that we left off. And it's like when we play the Desert Island Jukebox game, like who didn't you mention? Like right now at this moment in time, I'd say Donny Hathaway deserves more attention. You know what I mean? Screw R. Kelly. Donny Hathaway was the epitome of soulful sexuality. But we, I'm happy to talk about dozens of others. We always get the Cheap Trick question, and it's like, look, Rockford is a 90-minute drive from where I am on the northwest side, okay? And what else besides the clock tower, which I think they took down, right? Does Rockford have, to be proud of, right? So it's like, let's give Cheap Trick to Rockford, in the same way, let's give the shoes to Zion. Not really Chicago, certainly plenty of Chicago attitude, but I mean, Rockford should be happy to have something of its own. Obviously a great band. We love Cheap Trick.
I would add, we mentioned Sam Cooke. If we didn't, we should have. Sam Cooke is an artist that I would have wanted on there. We mentioned Willie Dixon, Common. The one I want to mention that we didn't really mention, and they're not really artists per se, not really musicians, but they are essential to the understanding of art and the way Chicago operates in the musical realm. And that's Jim Nash and Danny Flusher of Wax Trax Records, the late founders. Two gay men from the Midwest starting an underground label that changes the world. And I think a lot of it had to do with their taste and their ability to give their artists complete creative freedom. At a time when everybody was trying to rip artists off, they were doing the exact opposite. They were ripping themselves off to allow these artists to create whatever they felt like. And so it's an amazing legacy. I think they are essential to understanding Chicago's musical legacy of the last 40 years.
Well, that's a key point, is that it is not just why does Chicago work? It as a musical city, as a hub for innovation. Why did it work in the era of Chess Records and Thomas Dorsey's original gospel label? Why does it work now? This is the city that works. You can come here and you can create. And yeah, there are challenges. And boy, Logan is getting way too expensive to live anymore. So now you have to go to Pilsen, right? But you can run an independent label. And from the Wax Trax era to the present, where we have, half a dozen great indie labels, that persevere, and independent mom and pop clubs like the Hideout and the Empty Bottle that are holding on against all odds. First, it was merely the corporate monopolization of Live Nation and corporate concert promoters. Now, they've been shuttered for a year and a half, right? I think the press in Chicago, not the two of us, it seems self-serving to say, but people take the music seriously here. They write about it with passion, and radio has been hugely supportive. It gets more corporate and narrow all the time, but there's an infrastructure community here, and it's all about the art. And it's actually a Jersey saying that I always think of, but it sums up the Chicago attitude. In Jersey, the worst thing you could say about somebody was they think who they are, right? Big head, right? So, with certain notable exceptions, Billy Corgan, people in Chicago have not been rock stars. They are people who make their art and support one another while doing it. And, no nonsense, no Star Trip.
Right on. This is really incredible and such a diverse list. I'm so glad that Frankie Knuckles ended up there, and Naked Raygun, just some awesome picks. There were a lot of questions that came in though about the future of live music in the city with the COVID stuff going on, and hopefully the vaccinations will start to bring down the concern with that. But do you guys have any predictions about the live music scene and its importance, and really keeping this city vibrant with its music?
I think people are ready to go out. I know that I am, and we got to be, mask up and be socially distant and all that stuff. But man, we got to, there's no we all miss live music incredibly. And I feel like a lot of the clubs have hung on by their fingernails and they need to get back to stay viable. So I think it's only a matter of time. I think it will come back strong. Chicago's always been a great music town, and people go out. That's one thing that concert promoters have told me, and one thing that bands have told me. You can play a show in the middle of winter in Chicago, and you know that people are still going to come out. It doesn't matter how bad the weather is. Mid-January, it's freezing, it's below zero, and people are still going filling a club because they go out. And I don't see that changing. If anything, there's going to be a greater hunger for it than ever.
The clubs that are lucky enough to return, and I ask you to think about it in terms of your own budget at home. You have made not a single penny for a year and a half, and yet the bills come due every month, right? The electricity and the heat and the mortgage, right? So these clubs opening, I think we have to think about it. You support them. Don't ask to be on the guest list and buy 6 beers, even if you're going to drink 1. You know what I mean? Support those clubs. Be glad they're back, but also think about what they're operating against. These giant festivals like Lollapalooza, and there's every indication that Mayor Lightfoot is going to let Lollapalooza happen at 100,000 people in Grant Park. And that is stupid. It is irresponsible scientifically. It is irresponsible morally. Lollapalooza with its radius clause is not allowing a band that plays its stage to play anywhere else in the area for a good 9 months, right? I mean, it's just, we in the same way that, it sure is really easy to order your whatever on Amazon. You are putting mom and pop stores out of business. And by one-stop shopping, go to Lollapalooza, go to the big festival. Not only is, I think, it's not going to be safe to have that number of people anywhere, even if it is outdoors. It's also a threat to the music infrastructure that is here 365 days a year. But that's me. I'm anti-festival.
I think Lollapalooza will be long gone, and those clubs are still going to be here. That's what I think.
Yeah, but it struggling.
They've always struggled, but Chicago's club scene. We've got people here who are really invested in this scene for more than just kind of a money thing. You got to do it for the love of it. To open a club, the margins are so thin. But I've lived here long enough to know these clubs aren't going anywhere. They're some won't make it, but I think I have positive vibes coming their way, because I just think that people are anxious to. That's what they're thinking about. They're thinking about going back to those clubs. I don't think they're thinking about being in a field with 100,000 people as an attractive option right now. It's about going to see a great band in a club, in an intimate club right now.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Yeah. Hey, Jennifer.
I just wanted to chime in on time. So we're at 8:35, and we are very, very happy that some of you have stayed. Want to be respectful of everybody's time. So let's try one more question. Maybe even a 2-parter. But
we'll take 2, Jennifer. What the heck? There's 2 of us.
Okay. If anybody needs to drop off, we are so grateful that you were here. So thank you for being part of this. We know that we'll bring Jim and Greg back to the libraries. It's been 2 years. We didn't see you in 2020.
Huh.
But Jim and Greg came out to Arlington Heights 3 times to do 3 incredible shows. So we know we're going to be bringing in our partner libraries and featuring them again soon. We've seen all of the requests for number 11 through 20. So
yeah, no, I know. And all the folk fans are all mad at us for not mentioning it. We did mention the Old Town School of Folk Music, and look, Roger McGuinn, when he was James.
Yeah, McGuinn and
it starts there,
John Prine, Robbie Folks.
Yeah, we had, I think, one of my all-time 2 or 3 in 16 years of doing the radio show, Greg, one of my all-time 2 or 3 top favorite interviews was John Prine.
Yeah, he was
sitting with Prine. And of course, Prine always gives all the props to Goodman, and Goodman was always talking about Prine. I mean, that was a great and vibrant scene, but we have to draw the line somewhere. We can't talk about everything.
We only had 10 names. That's the problem. So like Jennifer said, we're going to have 10 more the next time, and then 10 more the next time, and 10 more the next time. We can make this a series. It'll be like Game of Thrones. We'll do like 6 seasons.
Yeah, there you go. So what? Two more questions. Give us two good ones.
You got one in mind, Jennifer? Do you want me, so you mentioned Wax Tracks, which was important and totally key, but I was wondering about other record labels. I famously remember a 1993 Spin article written by Don Howland that mentioned Drag City was the greatest indie label in America at the time. But so what other record labels do you think have supported some of this music that we've been talking about all evening?
Drag City's a great example. Bloodshot, really defining that alternative country sound. Thrill Jockey with so much of the
Thrill Jockey is the one.
Yeah. Who am I missing?
And so many more. I mean, this is independent clubs, independent labels. That's been the lifeblood of the city, for as long as I've lived here, and which has been basically my entire adult life. It defines who we are. This is not about bigger, better. This is about, smarter and cooler. It's like we're just, there's taste. There's that aesthetics at operation as a driving principle, as opposed to making a lot of money as quickly as possible.
Yeah, and people are right. People in the chat are talking about Numero Group and probably the most high quality reissue label in America today. Pravda always did great work. People want to know why we didn't mention Albini. I certainly always cover him in class. Big Black.
We did mention Big Black, and I think Steve deserves all the props as a recording engineer who records bands for minimal amount of money. I mean, he's produced, engineered, probably thousands of punk records at this point. But I also want to talk about the principled business people here, including people like Steve, who runs a great studio at a fair price. Somebody like Bettina Richards, is a woman who pays her artists, and makes sure that they get compensated for their efforts. It's not a lot of money, but it's a fair price.
Touch and Go did for a long time.
Touch and Go and Bloodshot and all these people are very principled in the way they operate their businesses, and I think that accounts for their longevity. They're not in it for to make Google-sized money, but in terms of what they do for the city, it's absolutely essential, and it starts with the people who are running these particular institutions.
Totally agree with you. Yeah.
I'll hop on with one very quick one. I was going to go with the negative and ask which Chicago artist has contributed to the worst aspect of Chicago music, but I'm going to skip that one and instead just ask some up and coming artists.
So no artist in the history of popular music, which, let us face it, long before Frank Sinatra and all the way up to yesterday, Marilyn Manson or whoever you want to say, no artist in the history of popular music has ever faced more indictments, some 48, than Robert Sylvester Kelly. And he sits in the Federal Correctional Institution, MCC, awaiting federal trial in New York in August, in Illinois, another second federal trial. After that, the state of Illinois and Minneapolis. And at the height of this Me Too moment, it's just unforgivable that all the great things that Greg and I championed Chicago for, that for 30 years, an artist who sold 100 million records of his own and those he produced was allowed by the press, by radio, by the record industry, thousands were people who knew, right? Operation Push, Jackson's people were his spiritual advisors. People knew, and yet this man was allowed to prey on 48 underage women whose names I know for 30 years. And I think, hey, there's a lot of things in Chicago we shouldn't be proud of. I'm personally sick to my stomach to see Rahm Emanuel nominated, named by Biden as ambassador to Japan. This was, as someone I saw on Twitter, a great political pundit for the Washington Post said, this is a man whose diplomacy skills began and ended with F you. right? And we're sending him as an ambassador anywhere to represent, anyway. Chicago's got some bad things too. And part of it is we got to call them out. And that was certainly one of them. So that's one we oughtn't to be proud of.
Up and comers, I'll take a stab at that one. I think Jim covered the other aspect up pretty well. I'm not sure I can top that, but I'll give you two artists that everybody should know about that I think are going to be fantastic, or are fantastic, and deserve wider recognition. Rick Wilson. He is anybody who's seen him live knows what I'm talking about. The man is a whirlwind, a dervish up on stage. What was it? He brought the Lane Tech marching band on stage with him at Pitchfork a couple years ago, and talk about a dance party. Rick really delivers. I saw him do a parking lot show during the pandemic last year, which was pretty phenomenal as well. I think he's ready to. Once we get back to a semi-normal state, I think we're going to see a lot of great music. He's made a lot of great music. People should check it out. It's Rick with an R-I-C, no K, Wilson. And I think Milk Belly is one of the best rock bands Chicago has produced easily in the last 10 years. Phenomenal co-ed quartet and great live, made a really strong series of records. If you like the Jesus Lizard, which I do, this band is a close cousin to them in terms of their approach to music, and tremendous live as well. So
Ganser and Beach Buddy.
Yeah, Ganser's great too.
Ganser, I think, is doing a 3-weekend run at partially capacity empty bottle. A lot of great music. Always great music in Chicago.
Well, this has been like hanging out with 400 of your closest music heads for an hour and a half. So thank you guys so much. It's been awesome. Yeah.
It's our pleasure. Support your local library, for God's sake. What would America be without libraries? Or library, as I say. I'm from Jersey. That's when my Jersey comes from. Library. Lieberry. Library.
Yes, we couldn't do it without you. Jennifer, you've been more than generous with us over the years. We really appreciate it. Thank you, Neil and Michael, as well, for your help tonight. It was incredible, and we were blown away by how many people actually checked in tonight. Man, that's great. It's incredible. I hope everybody enjoyed it as much as I did and Jim did.
Yeah, if we were in a real room with a sound system, and then how many we checked? It's not like we didn't check this crap, right, Jennifer? And
we checked, yes.
But at least the two of us kept our pants on.
It was fantastic.
Hey, speak for yourself, huh?
Corporate executives. I don't know. There was a professor who had booked us for a gig at a university that shall not be named, who had that moment. He decided to get up out of the hot tub during a Zoom meeting and thought his camera was off, and it wasn't. I was like, what the hell is wrong with you people?
Wow, that's a quarantine greatest hits for sure. The rest of us
actually
videos like that.
Thanks for providing that picture for us on the way out. Appreciate it.
Well, everybody here was very well behaved.
It's a deterrence machine. No matter how much we suck tonight, Greg, at least we kept our pants on.
There you go. Okay.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you.
Thank you, Greg.
Have a good night,
Thank you,
everybody.
Michael and Neil and all of our library partners. Thank you, everybody who was here. You're the most important participants to make this interesting and exciting and fun. We adored your questions. Jim and Greg saw every one of them, even if we didn't get to them. So this was fun, and we can't wait to do it again, maybe in different circumstances in person soon enough.
Yeah, that would be fun. Awesome. Thank you.
All right.
Okay. Good night, everybody.
Everyone. Good night, everyone.